Jesse Smithey of Five Star Preps here in Triple F Studios alongside Rich Burnett of Triple F. And Rich, I can't remember exactly when this idea crystallized, but Five Star Preps and Triple F kind of combined forces in the spring and in the summer to bring a unique combine series to the East Tennessee area, to area high schools. I know you have played a huge part in this, and it's been fun to kind of see it get off the runway a little bit. Let's tell everybody about what we did and kind of why we did it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it crystallizing somewhat at D&B's next door, over some hot dogs as me, you, and Lee were just chalking up, how to just bring some cool, positive press to the community to get us excited for the football season. I mean, a lot of it is like, how can we promote these kids, promote these programs, all within the conversation of athleticism, and give coaches honest, reliable information and feedback that they can use for their programs, but then also just see in the grand landscape of Knoxville football and beyond, Greenville's a little bit further out there, proximity-wise, where does my program stand in relation to these other schools? And I just think like that type of objective information is just so valuable. Number one, it is objective information. It's something that, if done right, is trustworthy data that is real and it's current, and it's like, what is so-and-so school doing, that we're not doing? How do their facilities play in? How do the fact that they have a strength coach that's certified play in? Like, there's obviously a lot of variables that go into development and athleticism, but to just first see the data of, like, who's got the fastest kids, who's got the strongest kids, and then, going into the season and just seeing kind of how that matches up as the season plays out, that's just really good information for everybody, assuming we all are doing it for the right reasons, right? Which we are. I mean, everything we're doing with this is again, just for positive, positive feedback, so that coaches can then take the necessary steps that they need to improve their program or change their tactics a little bit going into certain games. Like, all that is good stuff, and we've had a lot of great turnout and participation for this event. It's been awesome.
But there's so much. I mean, this isn't 1980 anymore. A coach shouldn't just be like, that kid runs like a gazelle or a deer, or that guy's just a football player. There's so much technology that we can use at our fingertips to not only verify those statements, but also dig a little deeper, get under the skin of these athletes and see what their best attributes are and what they lack, and how to go about preparing plans training-wise to attack those weaknesses and enhance those strengths, right?
Yeah, and the first thing I'll say, and I am a data guy. I'm kind of a data nerd. I really love, my job is to make people better at these so-and-so qualities that I need to study them like crazy so that I can make sure that happens. But there's also a lot to be said about the things you can't measure. It's like when you go out there and somebody puts pads on, you just watch them ball out. Like, there's just some things you can't put your finger on, they're extremely athletic, but their decision-making ability, the kind of reactivity that you see that is like multiple planes of motion, just their skills, like there's a lot that we can't measure, but the stuff that we can measure, we want to do really well. And so to your point of being able to actually, identify when you say this kid is really quick or fast, that's basically what sports science is. Sports science, which has become more and more popular these days. The University of Tennessee football and Olympic sports just hired their own full-time sports scientists, both of them within the span of a couple of years. Jerome Learman with football has done an incredible job of just being the guy that just is constantly measuring stuff 24/7 through GPS and all these other data, technologies that measure these things and then help draw conclusions from that. So it's not his job necessarily to make decisions with that information, but at least like summarize and draw up, what does this mean? Why is he, struggling to do his normal, performance, could be this other factor. So the data just helps you make informed decisions, but it also just really tells you, man, like, what separates, one athlete from another, for sure, and as well as their potential. Like, when you have kids that are in 8th, 9th, 10th grade who are kind of the phenoms coming up, you're like, wow, this kid's a stud. Like, look at how he moves. I mean, you're getting this information now, and you're saying like the typical growth rate for an athlete at that age from, 9th grade to 12th grade is this. Like, God only knows if this kid was in the right hands, like where they could end up, athletically speaking. So it just, to me, highlights the importance of real development over the course of time, because you never want to waste talent. You want to ensure that kids who are incredibly talented and gifted, especially athletically, that they're doing the right things over the course of time, because that time flies by quickly, and what are these programs doing to really surround that athlete and these teams with everything necessary to make sure that development happens. So that's kind of my lens and my vantage point of why this information is so valuable. But a head football sport coach might see a little bit differently, but hopefully that kind of sheds some light on what you're referring to there.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, this wasn't about saying, well, strength coaches in the area aren't doing the right things. There are a number of great strength coaches in the area. You think about Brandon Waters out at Maryville, and Brian Nix, the head football coach at Alcoa, does a fantastic job of running their weight room. But it was more so from, as you said, let's go out into the area, see who the most athletic teams are, see who the most athletic players are, but also here are some things along the way that can help your program, whether you have a top-notch strength department or whether you don't have one that's really gotten off the mat yet. So I feel like it's been a really valuable tool for the schools that we've been able to go to so far, and definitely looking forward to hopefully branching out with that in 2025.
Yeah, and then there's also the fun aspect of it that for years I've always told myself this and told our football team this, because as a high school football strength coach for 6 years in Atlanta, and you just can imagine the amount of talented programs there are in that area, and just talented kids, I would always say, like, I wonder if you could compare how many 30-inch plus verticals a team has with their win-loss record. Like, there was just simple things like that where I felt like, man, the team with truly the most athletes, like, would they win the most games? Like, that was just always a speculation that I had, that when Lee kind of came up with this idea to do this, it was like, how much of a role does athleticism really play with wins and losses? And because of course there's so many of the variables like we talked about with scheme and just being healthy, being durable throughout the season. A lot of that doesn't show up in some of these tests, but one thing I looked at that will show a graphic of is how many big guys does a school have? How many 250-pound plus players does a program have? School A versus school B. How many 20-mile-an-hour plus guys does Bearden have versus Oak Ridge? And just the real data of, like, who's got the speed, what are they doing with it? Like, that's all stuff that we all eat up. It's just as a community that is rooting for these programs to be successful. I think it's just cool information to have, man. It's just fun, and it makes things a lot more enticing going into a game to see, like, that electric team who's just loaded with speed, or a team that maybe struggles to find some of those athletic attributes, so how they scheme a little differently to make up for that. That's high school football. Like, sure. That's what makes high school football so special, is that the players and the coaches at hand take what they've got and they make the most of it, and that usually results in the win column more so than just how many athletes do you have. So,
well, let's talk about what we did, because I think when people saw this combine series, they were like, well, what is it? It's in 12 years ago, a kid might have gone down to Atlanta from the Knoxville area and done a Nike Spark combine, and they're tested in the 40 and they're tested in the vertical, maybe two other things, and then they go home. And for so many years, that's what we got, and that's kind of what determined star ratings and in recruiting. Things are changing with that. So let's discuss kind of what you would do when you arrived at school, fill in the blank, and begin to test those athletes. What all did you do every day that you did this?
Yep. So it took about an hour and a half. We'd show up. We, of course, had the kids weigh in, get their height, and, shoes off. It was a legit height, not what you post on Twitter, which we had a side conversation with the kids about that, because, that's what it is, man.
Yeah.
Get what you want out of it. We all know that even, these college football website rosters aren't the real heights either, so it's all good. And so we did all that, kind of the boring stuff of just collecting, the measurables, and then and that usually went by pretty quick with all of the sport coaches helping out. But it was me. It was me on the scale, me with the height measurements. I was the one consistently doing this every time. And then we immediately jumped into, every kid had their card with them, our warm-up, that they were, at that point, post warm-up and beyond, responsible for recording or helping record their data. So they were responsible for when they got to a station, handing their cards off to a coach, made sure that everything was filled out, and we would call out the numbers and they would get it done. But it was stationed out to where the older, faster athletes, usually your your skill guys that were, upperclassmen would end up running the 40 first. So we ran a 40-yard dash where we got 4 different splits. We got 0 to 5, or we got 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 30 to 40. And then we did a agility test called the 5-10 agility, which is a little cleaner and more simple than the pro agility that really does kind of specify their ability to turn rather than the 5-10-5, which is a little bit more kind of speed based a little bit. We did a med ball throw for distance with an 8-pound ball. And then we did a vertical jump test and a reactive strength index test, which is basically looking at how an athlete, how kind of fast their feet are, but just how they respond to the ground and use the ground to their advantage. Those are usually your playmaker type athletes, but even your linemen, to have fast feet, it usually tells us who's going to be a collegiate lineman or not. But then the other one was a flexibility screen. So that was my moment, my opportunity to highlight guys as I had all their attention. 103 kids at Oak Ridge, all in the circle with their pens, papers, partnered up. Like, guys, like this flexibility piece, we have 4 weeks of summer left. Like, if you score a 1 on any of these things when it should have been a 2 or a 3, like, you need to be stretching. Like, go home and stretch, do this exact stretch, 4 days a week, and have an honest intervention with where your mobility is with some of these things. Because, like, your hamstring, even in, like, the most kind of normal and basic position and gait is already like restricted. It's already fighting back against you. So just highlighting that, just kind of hopefully having a light bulb go off, for some of them. But most of them had pretty good mobility. Like, that really wasn't an issue. The coaches around here are doing a really good job of prioritizing that. But for the ones that did, who like, hip flexor wise were really tight, and it's a lineman who has to get in a 3-point stance like over and over and over again, and it's like that much more burdensome to do it. Whereas if they just took the time to stretch and get mobile, that wouldn't be so much of a struggle every time. Like, those little things, from a Triple F standpoint of like, how can I impact these kids and the season they're about to have now with the time that's left in the summer to really prioritize some of these things. So it was also educational. It was more than just showing up and just testing, getting out of there and just being real transactional. As a coach, I still try to connect and improve, some of these athletes' well-being as best as I can in collaboration with the strength coach and with the sport coach. And I just loved getting to go out there and be myself and just let people know who we are and who I am, and just truly like, hey, I'm here to serve you guys. Like, let's get some good numbers, let's learn a few things, and let's get excited for the season.
So you're out there an hour and a half. You're breaking things down analytically for them that they'll get after the fact, I'm sure. But I'm sure during the process, are you able to say while we're doing these things and as you mentioned, kind of coach them through it?
Absolutely. And that's when it goes to almost like a 2-hour time frame, which I'm okay with, because most coaches who carved this out for us, really gave me the time to really make sure it was impactful, and say, hey, here's why we're doing this. Here's exactly what we're looking for. Because some tests, it's amazing how many kids don't know how to do a vertical jump, like, to be honest, and do it optimally, and do it in a way where they're timing it well with their arms, and they're really focusing on extending through the legs in a powerful manner. And when I notice that, I can't just let it happen. I want to coach a kid up as best as I can in the moment. Like, let's test well. Like, it's no different than coming up with some math test that you want to do at school, and then you just don't educate the student on how to be best prepared for that test. Like, a lot of with testing that you got to be mindful of, it's like you want to make sure the athlete is prepared for it. Like, they actually know what's coming and how to position their body and time things well. And so I would take 5 to 10 minutes as that group got to the station to kind of help them with their stance on the 40 if they've never done anything like that before. Most of them have not. A lot of these kids are not going to camps, which is fine. Like, they're being kids and they're playing other sports, and so they're not going crazy with the camp circuit like some kids are having to do. So in those moments, like, this is your camp. Like, this is your chance to brush up on some of these things and being timed to get that feedback. And so, yeah, we hope to do this long term and to continue to get this objective data and do these same tests the exact same way every time with the Brower lasers, with the plyomat, vertical jump, and reactive strength index, and just truly make it something that from one year to the next, this not only is telling us about the current team at hand, but just trends of development that the coaches can appreciate, because it's a lot of work. Like, all the technology we're bringing to costs a lot of money. There's a lot of programs that can't afford all that. So, the fact that we can partner up with them and just, again, be there to serve that program and give them this data in a really organized spreadsheet with the graphics and everything, like, that's what we hope to provide, and because it's important, we want coaches to be prepared for the season, to know kind of where their team's at.
And what I love about this is it's not a money grab. There's so many combines and camps in our state throughout the year. Come to this combine, run your 40, but you're going to get seen. Well, that can be a detriment really to their careers at times. This was all totally free, right?
Totally free, and it will always be free. Like, again, Lee and I, like, our hearts, if people haven't understood this about us yet, are kids. Like, we just want to impact as many kids as possible. That's why Triple F exists. Money is really not, I mean, we're going to pay our bills, but, like, beyond that, like, we just want to love on as many kids as possible, and to do it in this manner where we get to come to you is awesome, and it's powerful, and it's a great way to build that connection, that if they decide they want to, come and train with us, after school, before school, and be a member of Triple F and have this resource for them, then great. But we want them to at least know who we are, and for us to have an interaction is important. And yeah, I mean, going back to the whole camp stars thing and the burden that these kids have of just like, I got to get a good time at this camp, and if I got a bad one, then I got to do another camp. I mean, by the end of the day, like in one summer, you got wide receivers that are juniors in high school who are just trying to practice with their team are now doing 7 or 8 camps in one summer, and it's like hamstrings are literally like hanging on by a thread, and it's hard to go to a camp like that, which could be your 4th or 5th one after having run 15 gassers with your team that day before or that morning, because you're conditioning as a program and you're trying to do what's best for your team to win games, and say, no, I'm not going to run a 40 today. But like a lot of what we tell our kids, it's like, hey, take the time that you had from the last camp, be okay with it. But it's also like, it's like herding cattle at some of those deals, man. Like you show up, and I'm always interested in asking our kids like what they experienced when they went to one, and I would say that a majority of time they don't even know what they ran. So they were never told what their time was. They might run a pro agility, they might run an L drill, but most times it's they get one shot at a 40, one shot of pro agility, not like a real warm up, and they're just like pushing them through like crazy. And a lot of it is and I'm talking about a lot of these school camps that kids are trying to go to hopefully catch the attention of some of these coaches to recruit them. But it's just hard on their bodies. It's hard to know if it's doing any good or helping them out. So we want to play the role of advising them on like how many camps to actually go to. Like, Lee is, got his PhD and all that stuff and knows how it works. So, he wants to ensure that kids are prioritizing what you need to prioritize, getting ready for the season, while still doing a few select camps that are really going to make a difference. But if at the end of the day you just want to run a 40 and be validated, like Wayan LaRue ran a 4.41 and put it on his Twitter, it's legit. We got a video of it. It's on lasers. It's like that should be sufficient for whoever's trying to recruit you. Like it's without a doubt validated by somebody who's educated and certified, and so hopefully we can shift the youth sports model a little bit, especially for football players, to not be so burdened by jumping to all these camps. But hey, let's maybe figure out a way to organize this a little bit better and get your numbers without getting killed all summer long. Yeah. So,
well, if there's one thing that I've learned about you, and you've even self-professed this, to be a data guy, and a data guy you can dive deep into it and get into things that I don't understand. But one of the things I do like about this combine series that we did, is that you can produce the data for me, general media guy, or coach so-and-so, into like just tangible graphs and what I call blob graphs. I don't know what you call them, but I can see their strengths and weaknesses like that, and then really start to learn about the details of what you're going to add to that. Explain kind of what these coaches get after the fact of doing this combine series.
So one of the most effective visualizations that I've done and found is a radar chart, mostly because athleticism is complicated. I've basically boiled it down to 8 key qualities here at Triple F, and it's what we tested with these football teams is the same kind of premise of the 8 qualities we assess at Triple F. So it's size of an athlete, height and weight, super important. It really tells you a lot about, especially in football, some of their potential, but not everything, right? So that's one piece. So size, aka body composition, all that kind of falls within that category. That's usually the one you can't really change much. You choose your parents better next time, but otherwise that's locked in, right? Flexibility, upper body power, lower body power, elasticity, that kind of reactivity we talked about, agility, acceleration, and top speed. So of those 8, I have found professionally that those are the most indicative of true on-field performance. Because a lot of times what you do in the weight room or in a training facility doesn't quite represent who you are as an athlete on the field. And so it's my job to bridge that gap really well and to make sure that the test that we're doing here and the training that we're doing here actually impacts performance. And it doesn't have to be fancy. A lot of it is just fundamentals, speed, how we measure speed, like how fast can you run? Like what is your top speed measured by either GPS or lasers? Pretty straightforward, but how do you actually develop that, and how is that different from acceleration? Starting speed or like that kind of midway acceleration. Those are 2 very different qualities, in my opinion. In basketball, we do have Jay Kirk from Alcoa and Cam Swearingen from Webb. Those are 20-mile-an-hour guys. You get them on, and Taj Bowers, who's now playing football this year, but you get those guys on the track and they're zooming, 19, 20 miles an hour, even though they're mostly hoopers, by trade. That's impressive, but that's not necessarily normal. There's most basketball guys, top speed might be 18, 19 miles an hour, but they're getting that way early on. They're able to hit that 18 miles an hour in just, 10, 15 yards, So that's kind of more telling of a quality for that athlete in that sport. So altogether, with these 8 qualities, it really does form just a nice kind of, shape, if you will, of percentiles. The best athlete would then be the one who's most well-rounded. So, because it all kind of divots out based on the 100th percentile on the inside or outside and the 0th percentile on the inside. So, the one graphic that coaches will get and kids get here is how balanced am I, really? Like, what is the one glaring divot? Mm-hmm. Braylon Harmon, pretty much maxed out on literally every athletic quality except for size. He's just a smaller guy, but, it is what it is. I mean, it didn't affect his ability to perform on the field. Doesn't affect a lot of guys who have that stature that he has. But you look at the rest of his numbers, it's like, holy crap, off the chart. He is the 100th percentile with a lot of our kids here. And it's just a cool thing to see. But for most kids, it's not that way. Most athletes, depending on genetics or, having their training age, you're going to see a couple divots. You're going to see an area where they might be 50th, 60th percentile for most things, but then flexibility is a struggle. I pick on Caden Kutcher too at Hardin Valley, lacrosse football player. Flexibility is his deal, so I'm on him all the time. Let's keep working on this. Everything else, he's checking all the boxes. So that visual allows you then to be more productive with your time. Time is of the essence always with training and schedules. Why are we wasting time training a quality that already is maxed out? Mm-hmm. So that's just part of me being a strength coach. If I only have an hour, 15 minutes, hour and a half, with this athlete 2 days a week in this setting, much less even in the collegiate setting when I was, maybe only granted 45 minutes sometimes with their basketball team. How am I going to maximize that time? I mean, that's the plainest way you can put it. I hope that the coaches receive that information the same way. Because every strength coach or coach in Brandon Waters at Maryville and Kevin Day at Oak Ridge, they have their athletic conditioning class. They can choose to do power cleans, bench press, back squat, rear foot elevated split squat, front squat. I mean, Coach Holbrook at West, all these coaches who are just looking at all the tools in their toolbox, if you will, to decide, which exercise to do. And for the most part, if you do all the basic ones every year, your athlete's going to get better, but you might have that one athlete, your quarterback or your, star receiver, whoever. It's man, what if they just spent that 30 minutes to an hour working on loaded jumps and then maybe mobility? That might be the best use of their time. It's harder for us to do as coaches because now we're having to do multiple things at once, but ideally you are giving the athletes a more individualized kind of approach because you took the time to measure these things. So, but you could even have one football team like Oak Ridge last year was insanely athletic, they graduated a ton of guys with just real speed or now, going to different schools. So maybe, speed wasn't as important last year to work on, whereas this year it might be more important. So I just hope that information is just useful and we can help kind of guide that process for them. Because it really is just about choices. It's what offense are we running this year? Or these kids are really smart this year, so they can handle some more complex defensive schemes. Or again, it's high school football. This information can only help you. And especially when you're knowing you do a good job. You're Eddie Spradlin at Greenville with a tremendous program, and then you see it. You see how good your program is athletically compared to others, and it's affirming for him to know that he's doing a good job, and it's encouraging for his staff. And let's keep the things rolling, So again, trying to keep this as positive as possible, and those data visualizations are crucial. Because if you don't have that, most people are just kind of confused. They're just looking at a mess of data and they don't really know what conclusion to draw from it. Right. So sports science, your job is to do that for them. Like, how can I just present this in a way that makes sense? So
one of the questions is just me being a media member. I talk to many guys who are being recruited to play college football. And one of the common questions that they all get, whether it's from me or a TV person, radio, is what are you doing now to prepare for that transition into college football? And it used to be, I need to work on my speed, or I need to gain a little weight. Yep. And just hearing you detail the science of it all is just, to me, it's really cool. It gives them specific things that they can learn in this combine series that they can take with them and help them get on the field earlier, other than just, I got to drink some protein shakes, or I'm going to go run some hills in the summertime.
Yep. And that's our job here, right, at Triple F. Like, we get kids from 75 different schools are represented here, middle school and high school. And it's so cool to be able to do the assessment that we do. First thing, it's one of the first things we do. And then, again, have targeted real conversations with athletes who just see, like, they see their assessment. They see that same visualization I talked about. They know where they're deficient, and let's just attack that. Like, let's be really purposeful with that time, that we have 6 weeks ahead of us before we get rolling. So that's our job here, man. Aside from, showing them who Jesus is and loving them hard and guiding them, making sure the character is number one, like this objective data is supposed to make everything simpler to where we can just like go all in on the things that are really important and ignore the rest of the fancy noisy stuff.
I think back to me being 15 or 16, and if somebody would told me at that age, hey man, you're not flexible enough, you need to do some stretching, I probably would have laughed at them. When you're that age, you just show up and play basketball, or you show up and do whatever because you're 16 and your body's different. Did you get any kind of results like that, or kind of confused faces telling a teenager they need to stretch, be doing these stretches?
Yes, especially when they thought that what they were lacking was this, ended up being something else. But a lot of these kids, I mean, it's such a learning curve for them to understand how training works too, and which exercises are going to produce the result. I think the one thing that is always interesting that we do here is we assess biological age, which to me is incredibly important. So basically, I could do that for the football data that I got too. And I'm glad we talked about this, because I'm going to send that to the coaches. But basically, if I have your date of birth and I have your current height and weight, and I have your mom's height and your dad's height, I can enter that into this tool that I have. It's built into our spreadsheet. I got it from Des Ryan, who is the sports scientist and director of youth athletic development for FC Arsenal, which in Europe, this is a big deal. Like when they're dealing with like contractual money for 14, 15-year-olds, which is a little weird how they do things over there. They want to know, how tall is this kid going to be? Is he in his peak height velocity right now? Where is growth spurts happening? Because they're managing all that at a young age. Yeah. Well, most of our kids are 13, 14, 15. And when I heard that tool was available and I heard Des speak, I was like, I have to have this. Like, this is something we need to implement. So essentially, you can have two 14-year-olds. I mean, this is not news to you, but it's just to actually like measure it and look at it. Two of them are very different sizes, but they're both 14. Chronologically, their biological ages could be very different from each other. One can biologically be a 16-year-old, while the other one biologically could be a 13-year-old, but they're both 14. Right. So we've all seen it, like 13U baseball. It goes from shortest to tallest, right. And then, a year or two later, it actually is flipped. Mm-hmm. Now these kids just took longer to catch up. Right. By the time, for boys anyway, that they're 17, it's a level playing field. But the ability to just get that basic data of honest height, honest weight, which means no shoes, like what is your exact height, mom's height, dad's height. You can predict how tall an athlete's going to be, and then track that and follow that as time goes on. That's one of the biggest things on their report that we produce for our kids here at Triple F is like predicted adult height is what it is. So when you talk about the confused faces of like, some people thinking like, man, my kid's still got another 2 or 3 inches. It's like, actually, according to this tool, which uses a ton of normative data, it's not my opinion. Like, I try not to get in trouble here. Like, this is not just what I think, which you get that a lot. It's like, no, this is based on normative data of by the time you are 16, you should have been 98% of your predicted height. We're showing that you're already 99% of your predicted height. So you really only have like 1 more percent to go, which is actually like half an inch or an inch. And for some people, that's disappointing. And then for some people, they look at it like, wow, I've got another 6 inches to grow. So it's like, so that again is important to me because we actually will train the kids a little bit differently and factor that in their scoring, because if this 14-year-old really is honestly a 13-year-old biologically, then that's how we're going to train them. We can't treat them like the 15 or 16-year-old that their counterpart is. Brody Smith, when he was 14, 13 when I first met him, he was already biologically a 17-year-old. So he was 6'5", at the age of 14.
Yeah, I remember.
So, but he was 99.5%, so he didn't have much more room to grow. So it made it seem like he's like, he was already tall, but it just really made like he's starting on varsity as a freshman. That's what happens when you're biologically further along. But what I tell kids in just a healthy conversation, like, look, this is the one thing you can't change. This is how God has mapped out your life and what He has intended for you. You're just going to have to be that gritty kid that just like has to scrap until you're caught up with everybody else according to your genetic makeup. But, if anything, I think it's a positive thing to be a little bit of a late bloomer and have to catch up in other ways, if that makes sense. So just information like that. Those are some of the cool things that we do to provide, again, honest and real information that doesn't necessarily change how you go about your life, but it at least, affirms the reality of which I can only hope to do. Because at the end of the day, man, like work ethic is simply about what's real, what can I control, and then just maximizing that and not worrying about the things you can't control. That's what training is. Sure.
So the one of the byproducts of this, and I would get text messages from you when you're doing the events, the combine series at certain schools. You're like, hey, this school had this amount of guys running this, and this school is going to blow your mind because of this. And what are some of the cool things that you've learned about certain, whether it's a school you want to shout out or a player you want to shout out? But for me, I can take this data and go, I need to keep an eye on this kid. He was not a starter last year, but he's reading off the charts right now. He's probably going to be a kid who's a upcoming junior who's going to have a huge year. I mean, for me in the media, I can see that data and go and derive certain people to keep an eye out for. I'm sure you can as well.
100%. And the first name that came to my mind as you're asking that, Tavarie Allen, I think is his name, at Fulton. It's going to be a rising senior.
And see, I don't know him.
No one knows who I just remember being like, because you could tell, I don't know if he's played football for very long. He's got a younger brother. And just talking to, Coach Long over there, and like, who is this kid? Like, he just ran 21 miles an hour. He weighs 195 pounds. Like, he's a freight train. Like, he could just absolutely destroy somebody. And so I haven't seen much of his stats or kind of how he's done with some 7-on-7 stuff. I think he's just kind of an under the radar kid that was recruited in the halls, basically. Like, just went to Fulton and was like, hey, you should come play football. So I don't know the full story on him. I need to kind of learn more about who he is, but he was one of our top performing athletes across the board on every single test we did. Just an absolute stud. And so those are the guys that, like, as a coach, you're most excited about, because people don't know much about him, and they don't know what to expect when they line up against him. But he's got the stuff. He definitely has the athletic prowess to do really well. Not to mention, of course, the ones that you already know got the stats to show for, but just the the comparison of like who's the fastest kid in Knoxville that we've tested. I think that's a pretty cool title to have, and I think Wayan is probably the one that has that crown to bear right now.
And that's Wayan LaRue up in
Anderson County. Man, I mean, talk about like real speed. Like, between him and Braylon, those are the fastest athletes I've ever seen at this age. Legit 4.4s. I mean, when you see an NFL combine athlete run a 4.4, you get excited, but to see that in high school already, it's insane. So
and a lot of kids, and
those kids don't know who Wayan is either, too. I was asking kids around here, I was like, you guys know who Wayan LaRue is?
And I remember seeing him at the Tennessee-Kentucky Futures tryouts that they would have out at Grace, and his linear speed was, you could see it even then as an 8th grader, incoming 9th grader, that it was far surpassing anybody else that ran behind him. But he's just a guy that has waited his time, and I think he's going to have a big year. But it's it's just there's so many kids, and I think you named some kids at Beard and maybe keep an eye on that they tested well, and that's what I love about covering high school sports is you get to see that career arc of a kid going in as a skinny little ninth grader who nobody's talking about, and now all of a sudden they're 17, 18, and they're going to have a monster year.
Absolutely. So again, when we talked about year in, year out doing this and tracking that data, like, from one year to the next, seeing that potential actually tick up, knowing like, okay, this kid could become something special for sure. We had a freshman at Greenville who had one of the highest RSI scores, and never done anything like that in his life formally, but just the fact that he had that bounce and twitch already, we're like, this kid's gonna be special.
So you said RSI. You got to explain that to somebody.
Yeah, RSI is, I always use the word bounce to describe it, but it's reactive strength index.
Okay.
It's simply how high you were in the air on 5 pogo jumps divided by how quick you were off the ground. So it's not just quickness and it's not just height, it's both. So that's what makes it a bit of a learning curve for some athletes, because they think that they can get a high score by just jumping as high as they can, but that ends up being slow on the ground. And then some athletes are pretty elastic, but they're not getting any height. Like, they don't have the leg power. So like a really incredible RSI score would be like a 4.0. And like Squirrel White is in the 5s, if that tells you anything. Okay. So they use the exact same technology and do the exact same test at Tennessee. And some of those numbers line up with the numbers that we see. I mean, there's Squirrel White, and then there's a lot of what the rest of human beings normally are like, but it explains why he's so explosive and shifty. And we have some kids that are like close to that, in the 4s. Whereas you might have a kid that has great linear speed, but doesn't have a great RSI score. So what does that tell us? And that's what plyometrics are. Plyometrics are any sort of quick, explosive landing drill or jump or bounds. A lot of stuff that you see in track practice and things that, or basketball, when a kid wants to get more bounce, plyos are really the answer and the solution outside of the weight room. And it's that ability to use the ground to your advantage. Like, how reactive am I to store that energy into my tendons and actually like reuse that energy in a positive way, in an organized way. A lot of it's just timing, just anticipating it well. So when I watch an athlete do that test, who otherwise, outside of me just explaining it in that initial deal, has never done something like that before, and I just see how well they perfectly time it just by attempting it for the first time, like I already know they're probably going to be pretty good. Brody Smith was one of those. When I first met Lee, Brody was, maybe 200 pounds. I think he was going into the 8th grade or going into the 9th grade. And I was showing him, the plyo mat, and he was doing the test on it, and he was in the like 3/8 and 4.0s, which for a lineman type body, that's special. And so when you see him get the rebounds that he does and have that quick touch at the rim, as well as play left tackle, it's not that surprising. Like, those are the kids that, between 250-pound athletes or 300-pound athletes, one goes to college and one doesn't, a lot of that separation comes down to their feet, just how reactive they are to the ground, because being big is not the only factor. Sure. And so I've made that a huge priority with people that we've worked that, with the plyo mat, that test in particular for most college football programs is really indicative of some of your best linemen too. So not just your fast guys. So that's what that kind of covers. That's different than acceleration or speed. It's kind of a whole nother quality, which if your team's not very good at that, guess what we need to do more in the off season or even in season? It's more plyos, more plyometric drills, because for whatever reason, the ground is not their friend. They're every time they try and like cut or like move or jump, it feels like they're a victim of all that energy, and the ground like fights back to them versus like storing that energy well, if that makes sense. So, but when you see an athlete move like a gazelle or have the fast feet, a lot of it is that quality in particular. RSI is what it's called. So,
well, I know in the coming weeks you're going to be releasing some of this data and showing like some of the top performing schools and top performing athletes in the area, and that'll be on 5starpreps.com and our social media as well. But as you wrap up year 1 of this combine series of 5-star preps and Triple F, what are you excited about and wanting to kind of bring in year 2?
Honestly, more participation. I mean, we had a lot of schools join in, but I just want more data. I'm excited for this dialogue to make it out there, because it did seem like as soon as we tested one school, another school would be like, hey, I forgot about that. I want to jump in on that. So it's like, man, as soon as people realize why we're doing this, how efficient it is, then I think it's only going to carry, and have a greater effect, or we get more schools involved, and maybe even I take this to Atlanta and test 2 or 3 schools from down there, maybe Grayson or GAC or some of the connections I have with some of the other programs to see where's Knoxville compared to, without having to drive our butts down there and go play them. Here's Grayson football with 196 players and 20 running backs that can run 22 miles an hour. Like, I don't know that that's true. I know that their numbers are what they are, but to get that data and to compare it, like, that would be my long-term goal. Is like, I think that's only going to make the environment for these kids better when we get better information about what other schools are doing and what makes them successful from an athletic standpoint. I think weight rooms will get better. There'll be more funds put into hiring strength coaches and better practices, and it's a long-term play, but my role in this would be to collect as much of that data as possible and present it in a way that makes sense and hopefully drives that decision. So schools are more willing to invest in this, because this is a real thing. It's not just who can grab and attract the most talented kids in town. It's like, no, you can take the kid you were talking about who's a skinny freshman and develop them the right way without having to feel like you got to go and get these guys from wherever. Like, that needs to shift. That needs to be a change, and I think this can drive that. Yeah. I think this can draw more attention to the development side of what youth sports is supposed to be versus just who's already fast and who's got them, if that makes sense. So that excites me, because as a strength coach, I've always prided myself in bringing the bottom tier up. I wanted to spend more time with the kids who really had no chance and see what we could do with those kids. Just give them some playing time, play on varsity one day, because just genetically or for whatever reason, they're just more behind on some of these qualities. But that's what the weight room's for. That's what my job is for. Like, the kids that are already a Ferrari, or a Lambo with their V12 engine that, like, I've kind of had that since they were in 6th or 7th grade. Like, there's not a whole lot more development to do with them, but the kids that really can benefit from it, I hope that this can draw more attention to it, for sure.
Well, Rich, man, I know you've been a blessing to this Combine Series. I want to thank you for all the work that you put into it, and invite everybody to, again, hop on to 5starpreps.com very soon. We're going to have a lot of that data that you produced, and looking forward to year 2.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for doing this with us, Jesse, and for collaborating with us in such a unique way. And I'm just excited to hear the buzz in town, man, of some of these kids and this upcoming season. I'm really fired up for the season, for sure.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.